A wealthy nobleman returns home to find his fortress shattered, his wife brutally beaten, and his young daughter stabbed 5 times. The attackers vanish like smoke. Now he wants blood. But the person who stops him from unleashing hell is the very wife who was attacked. Now there was this wealthy, powerful man named Malibus. He was incredibly proud. Proud of his sprawling stone house, proud of his noble name, and deeply smug about the peaceful little life he thought he had built. One day, he decided to go out riding in the fields for some sport, leaving his wife, Prudence, and their young daughter, Sophia, back at home. The heavy oak doors were locked tight. The house was totally secure. Or so he thought. You see, 3 of his old enemies had been waiting in the shadows. The absolute second he rode out of sight, they showed up with iron-tipped ladders. They scraped their way up the stone walls, shattered the glass, and forced their way right through the windows. And they unleashed chaos. They beat Prudence black and blue. They took knives to little Sophia, stabbing her over and over again. 5 brutal wounds in 5 different places. Then, they just left the poor girl there on the floor, bleeding and barely clinging to life. And like smoke, they vanished. When Malibus finally rode back and saw the absolute muddy, bloody ruin of his pristine home, he just broke. He tore at his expensive clothes. He screamed out like a madman, his voice echoing off the stone walls. His safe haven had been violated. His wife was battered. And his little girl looked like she was already knocking on death's door. He only wanted one thing, blood. He wanted revenge. Now Prudence was badly hurt, shivering and bruised. But she did not try to stop his screaming right away. She let him grieve. She let that wild, raging storm just wash right through him. Then, when the time was right and the screaming had turned to heavy breathing, she finally spoke. She told him in a calm, quiet voice that grief is completely natural. But blind rage is not wisdom. Their daughter might actually survive this. And even if she did not, destroying himself with sorrow was not going to heal her. But Malibus was not in the mood for logic. He paced the floor, yelling that any father in his shoes would cry. Any husband would burn for vengeance. He even pointed a finger in the air and reminded her that Christ wept for Lazarus. Prudence answered him gently. She said yes, tears definitely have their place. But grief needs to have limits, because if sorrow completely floods your mind, your good judgment drowns right along with it. And honestly, standing there in his torn clothes, Malibus admitted she was right. His heart was so shattered, he just did not know what to do anymore. So Prudence told him to call for advice, to gather a council. He called absolutely everyone: friends, relatives, doctors, surgeons, lawyers, neighbors. He even invited a few old enemies who were suddenly pretending to be his best friends. They all crowded into his great hall, murmuring and whispering, while the air in the house still smelled faintly of copper and blood. The surgeons spoke up first. They smelled of camphor and herbs, and they declared that their job was not war. Their job was healing. They promised to do everything in their earthly power to save little Sophia. The doctors stroked their chins and agreed. They quoted their dusty books, saying you cure an illness with its opposite. So the best cure for sudden violence is not more violence. It is peace, but the rest of the room had a very different, much louder idea. His fake friends started flattering him, whispering about how mighty he was. His neighbors, who were honestly just terrified of him, praised his power to the heavens. And the young, hot-blooded guys in the back, the medieval equivalent of frat boys, started banging on the tables, yelling that he needed to strike right now. While the wound was fresh, they started chanting for war. Then this older, much wiser man stood up. His dry, gravelly voice cut right through the noise. He warned them that people love screaming for war because they have absolutely no idea what it actually costs. He said drawing a sword is incredibly easy, but once you start a war, no man alive knows where it is going to end. Kids who have not even been born yet might end up dying in the mud because of it. Nobody wanted to hear it. The young guys just mocked him, laughing him right back into his seat. The room wanted noise, not wisdom. And Malibu's, with his pride stung and his heart hungry to hit something, went with the loudest crowd. He chose the advice that matched his own simmering anger. He decided to go to war. Prudence, standing quietly by the wall, saw exactly what was happening. This was not a real council. It was just chaos. It was just a crowded room full of people echoing her husband's own rage right back into his face. So she pulled him aside and spoke to him again, carefully, patiently, like a surgeon expertly cutting out a bad infection. Malibu's fought her on it. He puffed out his chest and said if he ignored a whole room full of shouting men to listen to his wife, he was going to look weak. He even threw all those dusty, old insults at her about women. He said you could not trust a woman with a secret if your life depended on it. But Prudence did not flinch. She just answered every single insult with cool, crisp logic. She asked him with a raised eyebrow, "Is it foolish to change your mind when you have clearly made a terrible choice? Is the truth somehow less true just because a woman happens to be the one saying it? And haven't men's fragile egos ruined quite enough kingdoms already?" And then she aimed right at the heart of the problem. She told him his grand council was completely corrupt from the very first minute. He had listened to flatterers feeding his ego, to reckless kids who just wanted to see a fight, to men who were terrified of him, to old enemies just faking their loyalty. He had gathered a room full of cowards who said one thing behind closed doors and something totally different in public. "That isn't wisdom," she explained. "That is a trap. Real advice," Prudence said, "only happens after you strip away the anger, the greed, and the frantic rushing around. A man has to pray first, then he has to really look inside his own messy heart. Then he goes and finds a few loyal, genuinely wise people. Not a shouting, table-banging mob, and most importantly, he has to ask what true justice requires. Not what his boiling blood wants." Slowly, the tension drained out of Malibu's shoulders. He started to soften. He looked at his brilliant, bruised wife, admitted he was wrong, and finally just asked her what he should do. Prudence did not even start with the enemies. She started with him. She told him to go make his peace with God. She said this whole bloody disaster did not just show how violent other people were. It showed the mess inside his own soul. His house was attacked from the outside because he had been careless and arrogant on the inside. Then she gave him a plan. She asked him to let her go speak privately with the three enemies. Just to test the waters, to see if they were still acting proud and dangerous or if they were broken by the horrible thing they had done. Malibu's, completely humbled, agreed. He handed the whole mess over to her. So Prudence sent for the three men and met with them in absolute secret. She did not lead with threats, she did not yell, she did something way more powerful. She made them imagine peace. She sat across from these hardened men and talked about the total, smoking ruin that war brings. She talked about mercy, even though they absolutely, positively did not deserve a drop of it. She gave them a doorway to repent before every single thing they loved was burned to the ground. And believe it or not, it worked. The men were completely shaken by her calm authority. They cracked, they confessed to everything. They admitted what they did was pure evil. They said they could never, ever repay Malibu's for the horrific damage they caused. They did not try to bargain or win. They just fell to their knees and begged for mercy. They surrendered themselves, their cause, and their entire future right into Prudence's waiting hands. When she went back and told Malibu's what had happened, something finally, truly shifted inside him. He nodded and said that confession is the neighbor of innocence. A man who actually admits his wrongs instead of making endless excuses might just find forgiveness. But Prudence held up a hand. She warned him that this was the most dangerous moment of all. An angry man might be violent, but a man who has all the power, the law entirely on his side, and a guilty, helpless enemy kneeling right in front of him. That man can turn incredibly cruel and just slap the label of justice on it. Malibu's, looking a little sheepish, admitted what he really wanted to do. He wanted to strip them of absolutely everything. Take every coin they had, seize their lands, and drive them into the mud in exile forever. Prudence stopped him right there. She said that isn't justice. That is just going too far. That is just greed wearing a mask. She told him, "You are already wealthy. Why in the world would you ruin your good, honorable name by acting like a greedy tyrant? Why win the punishment but lose your honor? Mercy," she told him, "creates way more lasting loyalty than terror ever could. And the greatest victory a man can ever win is not over a bitter enemy. It is over his own dark heart." That hit him harder than anything else she had said all day. Because he knew deep down in his bones it was completely true. He had been so incredibly focused on crushing those 3 men. But the real war, the actual battle, had been raging inside his own head the entire time. So the day finally came. The grand hall was quiet this time. The 3 enemies walked in, pale and trembling. They stood before Malibu's and then they dropped straight down to the cold stone floor. They confessed to the crime, every single bloody bit of it. They did not try to defend themselves. They did not deny the awful things they had done. They flat out admitted they deserved to hang. And right then, standing at the absolute height of his power, looking down at the men who had shattered his world, Malibu's made his choice. He reached down and he lifted them up. He looked them in the eye and told them that because they actually showed some real humility, because they truly and deeply repented, he was going to show them grace. He forgave absolutely everything they did to him, to his brave wife Prudence, and to little Sophia. He did not do it because the crime was small, it wasn't. And he definitely did not do it because he was weak. He did it because, in the very end, mercy is exactly what every single one of us is going to be begging for when our own lives finally draw to a close. And so, the proud man who started out screaming for blood ended up finding his restraint. The wife who took the terrible beating became the brilliant, unshakable mind that saved the entire family from ruin. And the absolute greatest victory of all was not revenge. It was peace. It takes a staggering amount of strength to choose peace when every instinct screams for revenge. Malibu's learned that the hardest battle we ever fight is the one inside our own minds, and Prudence showed us that true wisdom often starts in silence. If this story made you stop and reflect on your own battles, hit that like button to let me know. And if you want to keep exploring the deep, messy, and beautiful truths hidden in these ancient tales, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We have plenty more stories to share, and I would love to have you here for the next one.